May 15, 2017 meeting of Anne Arundel County Council is now back in session.
No standing.
Just want to let everybody know that the blessing was done earlier today, and we also did the Pledge of Allegiance, so we're just continuing what we already started, okay? All right, so Madam Secretary, do you want to read the ethics statement, please?
The Ethics Commission has asked that I advise you that under certain circumstances, members of the public may qualify as lobbyists when they testify before the County Council. If so, the law requires that certain information be filed with the Ethics Commission. The Chairman of the Ethics Commission has asked that those present review the Ethics Commission information in the foyer of these chambers. If there are any questions about lobbying requirements, speakers should contact the Ethics Commission in the Heritage Office Complex on Riva Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. All right, is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council briefly on any subject not on the printed agenda? You're welcome to come on up. We're asking you to keep it 2 minutes, so when you hear that little bell go off, just like that. So if you don't mind, and get your name and address, please.
Michelle Danoff, 1401 Pennington Court.
Okay.
She doesn't have a mic.
Okay, let's see what's going on here. All right, there you go.
You there?
You're good.
Good evening, gentlemen. Michelle Danoff, 1401 Pennington Court, Edgewater, Maryland, Mayo Peninsula. I have some just general comments about the budget, basically timing and necessities versus niceties. We've had many communities here speaking about, certain budget items and the timing of them and trying to get some smart growth versus just growth. And why don't we start the general development plan now? We all would rather have smart growth versus just growth for growth's sake. It is drowning this county. We're in gridlock, and it is costing everybody a lot. I don't know about you guys, but my household budget, if I found out that my foundation was failing, I wouldn't continue to put in the pool. We have $1 million allocated for the Woodland Beach Fire Department. That's a great start. They need a whole lot more, especially since the Mayo Peninsula has failing response times. They're below national average for fire and EMS. So I'm a little curious as to why we have about $250,000 allocated for a proposal that will then lead to over $3 million for a park that's already open. Again, this is a necessity versus a nicety. And I don't know about you, but if my foundation's crumbling, I'm fixing that first. Please, this is all of our money. Let's fix the foundation first. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, and let's see, we have a little special guest, and let's see, where's the chief? Where did my paper go over here? Nope, sorry about that. Chief Graves, Safe Stations. Come on up, Chief.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Alan Graves, Fire Chief for Anne Arundel County, and in County Executive Shu's efforts to address the heroin and opioid epidemic that's sweeping the county, I wanted to update you on a recent program that we began. That program is Safe Stations, and Safe Stations is a program in which any county resident can go to any county fire station, county police station, a city fire station and city police station to request assistance with any heroin or opioid issue. What they do when they come there, we check them for any medical issues. If they have any medical issues, we address that, and then we connect them with crisis response for programs. Those programs can be anywhere from a counseling program all the way to an intensive inpatient program. Since Safe Stations began about 3 weeks ago, we've had 26 people come to fire stations asking for assistance. It's important to note that there's been at least one Safe Station request from every council district in the county. So, as you know, you may think of certain areas as being predominant areas, that it's something that's affecting the whole county as well. Why will the program work? I think it's because people are comfortable coming to fire stations. Fire stations have always been the place you go to for help. and we're just making it available to people that have the heroin and opioid addiction issues. Law enforcement is helping because a lot of times people with those issues also have legal problems. By working with the police department and the state's attorney, we're able to remove some of those obstacles. And finally, our crisis response, the programs that are available to them, they're excellent at being able to get people connected with programs. And we're lucky to have a 24/7 crisis response unit. A lot of jurisdictions don't have that. So kind of in conclusion, what we're offering is not this magic bullet that will make everything better. But what it does is we open the door and we're holding it open with friendly faces to allow people who want help to walk through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, let's see. All right, let's see. Now we're on to the public hearing part. We got the constant yield hearing. So, Mr. Hammond, come on down.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. For the record, my name is John Hammond. I'm the county's budget officer, and thank you for the opportunity to kick off tonight's constant yield property tax hearing. Section 2-205 of the property tax article of the annotated Code of Maryland requires the State Department of Assessments and Taxation to certify to all taxing authorities a constant yield property tax rate which will produce the same revenue in the coming year that was produced in the prior taxable year, exclusive of new construction. The law further provides that if the taxing authority intends to establish a tax rate greater than the constant yield tax rate, it must advertise and hold a public hearing. An advertisement was placed by this county council in the local newspaper, which adheres to the procedures required by state law and was reviewed and approved by the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Anne Arundel County's constant yield tax rates for $100 of a taxable assessment for fiscal year 2018 are certified by the State Department of Assessments and Taxation as follows. 89.47 cents for the county excluding Annapolis and Highland Beach, 53.14 cents for Annapolis, and $0.00 for Highland Beach, as it is receiving an initial tax differential. The FY 2018 proposed budget decreases the real property tax rate from 91.5 cents to 90.7 cents per $100 of assessment for the county, excluding the city of Annapolis and Highland Beach. Such a rate is still 1.4% higher than the constant yield rate of 89.47 cents and will generate $703,555 in additional property tax revenues above the constant yield. Additionally, the FY 2018 county tax rate applicable to the city of Annapolis real property is similarly decreased from 54.8 cents to 54.4 cents per $100 of assessment in the proposed budget. Such a rate is still 2.4% higher than the constant yield rate of 53.14 cents and will generate $742,936 in additional property tax revenues above the constant yield amount. As previously mentioned, FY 2018 marks the initial year of implementation of a tax differential for the town of Highland Beach. Accordingly, the state's calculation methodology recognizes a constant yield rate of $0.00 for fiscal year 2018. The proposed county tax rate for Highland Beach is 87.7 cents, which will generate $265,183 above the state's calculated constant yield amount. It should be noted, however, that the proposed FY 2018 tax rate of 87.7 cents for Highland Beach is 4.2% less than the current year's county property tax rate applicable to Highland Beach, reflecting that Highland Beach provides some services of its own, negating the need for the county to provide those same services. As required by law, this public hearing has been scheduled. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Okay, let's see. Is there anyone who wishes to speak?
You need to make that.
Oh,
Say that, please.
I'm following my script over.
No, I'm telling you to say that.
Okay. County Council will set the property tax rate for Anne Arundel County, the City of Annapolis, and the town of Highlands Beach at a meeting beginning at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, June 14, 2017, in these chambers. Now, is there anyone who wishes to speak on this? Public hearing is open. Does anyone like to speak on this topic? Please come forward. The rate may exceed, sorry folks, I'm botching up today. The rate may exceed the constant yield tax rate. Now, if anybody would like to come forward and speak on this, please come on forward and get your 2 minutes. Okay, nobody cares. All right. All right. Is there any member of the council who would like to address the public? Yes, I would. Yours truly. This ought to be good. So, folks, here it is. You may have seen some interesting conversations in the newspaper about the things that I've had basically going on with the liquor board, and I just want to kind of set this straight, and I appreciate my colleagues just to let me say what I got to say. I want to just tell you a basic story and how this all played out so everybody has a clear picture. I believe the newspaper tried its best to pretty much hit all the different things, but there's some of the things that they missed, and so I'm not picking on them. You know, they did what the information they had. So here's what it is. The story begins. Nabbs Creek restaurant up in Derek Fink's area called multiple elected officials with no action. Then I got this call. I soon found out that a few people across the creek were complaining about the outside music. Things started to get a little interesting. I found that Nabbs Creek was brought in for hearings about noise violations. I also found out that the local watering hole, that was another bar nearby, was losing business to this Nabbs Creek. So how does one correct this? Well, if you're a person that owns that business, the first thing you think is, let's just put them out of business. Let's starve their sales. First, you bring Nabbs Creek in for multiple hearings, and then you have them paying enormous amounts of meats to attorneys to kind of save them, and then you stop them from operating outside by a case-by-case basis. Now, this is a waterfront restaurant during the summer months, and you're now not going to allow them to operate outside. Now, when there was these hearings, okay, there's regulations that require people to be approached by the people that are accusing them, right? And what happened in these regulations is that 10 people must sign a sheet contesting the liquor license, all right, to the person that actually has the license. And not one time was this ever met for Nabbs Creek. And the board still moved forward, okay, with their case. This is very similar, folks, to when you get a ticket from a police officer and the police officer doesn't show up, your case should be dismissed. Okay? In this situation, they didn't even make the 10 people forward, and they kept moving forward. Now, Nabbs Creek was never found in any violation. The things that I did to try to mitigate these situations and see actually what was going on is I sat on my boat for 4 hours between Nabbs Creek and the neighborhood to see if they actually the music was too loud. Nabbs Creek also rented a sound meter for me to sit there at the end of their pier to make sure that the music wasn't too loud. They spent money also soundproofing the outside of their building so that they weren't too loud outside, so the music wouldn't irritate the neighbors, because they couldn't have their functions on the outside. Well, now we're moving forward. Nabbs Creek catches on fire mysteriously, and they sold their license back to the landlord. The interesting part is that the business that was losing all their revenue is now part owner of the business that just caught fire. Now, I want to mention another case. This is the Depot Wine and Spirits story. The business wanted to move its license to a new location, was basically 4.2 miles away. See, this new location was in competition with businesses that had multi-million-dollar loans with a local bank. And the chairman of the liquor board was also involved with this bank, along with his nephew, who I will talk about in a minute. The chairman was hit with a $2,500 fine. Everybody saw that in the newspaper because he failed to disclose financial dealings with this bank. In fact, the interesting part is that some of the people that were fighting the Home Depot Wine and Spirits were also board members on the bank. But interesting, about a year and a half ago, they decided to remove their names from this board of directors because all the storm was starting that I created. The local bank was going to protect its investments. Who are we kidding? The depot had financial backings to weather the storms that Nabbs Creek didn't have. In fact, the depot spent over $600,000 in legal fees, and this liquor board wasted $120,000 of taxpayer money on contractual attorney representing this board. These are just two of my stories that I can tell you about. Mr. Walker and Mr. Pruski have their own stories. The council reacted to this and defunded that board by $70,000 because we felt that government was beating up the constituents of Anne Arundel County. Unanimously, we all took $70,000 out of their budget so they couldn't hire this lawyer to keep beating up the people. The council also took part in a resolution to go from a 3-member panel to a 5-member panel for better transparency. Unfortunately, Senator Astle and Senator Grange voted against this. Senator Astle and DeGrange also voted to remove the budget away from the county council. See, now the budget before was viewed by 7 people and questioning the money that they have. Now it's viewed by 1 person, and that's the comptroller. Get the disingenuous activity away from the council where someone's not paying attention to it was the game plan. The ethical part, okay, is the chairman had this nephew from the local bank. He came before him many times and never recused himself. Even the contractual attorney brought their own clients in front of the liquor board. The interesting part is no one said anything about this. Both legal counsels, department head, and other commissioners said nothing. If you see something, say something. That's the motto we have nowadays, isn't it? So how did we get here into this mess that we've got? Well, believe it or not, the Democrats have always recommended the commissioners to the governor, Senator Astle and Senator DeGrange. Because of the storm brewing, for the first time ever, the Republicans had a chance to appoint 1 person. However, was never asked if they were okay with the person being reappointed back in. I want to make this clear. The Republicans weren't even asked if they were okay about a previous member being put back into the board. The entire council voted for the liquor board to be completely replaced. That means all 7 of us, Democrats and Republicans, joined together and said, we need a new liquor board. We need to stop this nonsense. And Resolution 5816 was passed. And then on top of that, it was passed on to the governor's office and the appointment secretary, and I personally called the man and said, what's going on? We want councilman courtesy, or council courtesy. And so pretty much what was happened was we were sandbagged. It was completely ignored. So here we are, putting the same folks in, same folks that witnessed this unethical stuff. Government should never pick winner and losers. And all I got to say, folks, is to people here in Anne Arundel County, the fox is back in the hen house once again. Okay, with that being said, may I have a motion to suspend the rules to hear and/or vote on Bill 3317 out of order?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
All right. Madam Secretary, you want to call the roll?
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Pruka? Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to suspend the rules to hear and/or vote on Bill 3317 out of order is adopted.
All right. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 3317.
Bill 3317, an ordinance concerning Bay Ridge Special Community Benefit District approval of loan and modification agreement.
All right. Let's see, Mr. Trumbauer and Mr. Marsick, right?
I'll defer to the administration.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Tomia Debu from Budget Office, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. 3317 restructures an existing loan for the Bay Ridge Special Community Benefit District. The purpose is to eliminate a large upcoming balloon payment for this district. The bank has agreed to add 10 years to the payments to allow them to pay off the principal at the current pace. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Okay. Seeing no movement. Okay, we're going to open up the public hearing on 3317. If anybody wants to come in and chime in, 2 minutes. Seeing no movement in the crowd, we're going to close the public hearing on 3317. Madam Secretary, please read the title of 3317.
Bill number 3317, an ordinance concerning Bay Ridge Special Community Benefit District approval of loan and modification agreement.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we vote, I'd just like to disclose on the public record, I do live in the Bay Ridge community, but I don't own property. I rent, and I'm not on the board, so I do not believe there's any conflict. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 3317.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka. Aye. Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill 3317 is passed.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 24-17 as amended.
Bill number 2417 is amended, an ordinance concerning erosion and sediment control, grading permits, agricultural buildings.
All right. We got the administration, and Mr. Walker's also a co-sponsor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marsden, County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Dan Kane from Inspection and Permits. As we've discussed in previous council meetings, this bill is in response to the agricultural community's request to eliminate the grading permit requirement for structures that don't require building permits under Section 105.2 of the Building Code. Council amended this at the last meeting. We'd be happy to answer any questions, and we ask for your support of this bill tonight.
All right. Anybody chime in? Okay. We're going to open up public hearing on 2417. If anybody wants to chime in, come on up, give your name, address, and keep it to 2 minutes, please.
I just wanted to, Stuart Pittman, 440 Doden Road, Davidsonville, farmer down in Davidsonville. And I just wanted to thank you guys because this seems like a small thing, but it's a huge thing. When we came to you with the ag building permit exemption bill about 5 years ago, the other issue was the grading permits because we were spending a lot of money hiring urban engineers so that we could get grading permits to level ground to build our barns. And we found that state law doesn't require it. Other counties weren't requiring it. MDE came out with guidelines for these structures where you were doing less than 1 acre of disturbance. And soil conservation finally started not requiring it, but then we found that we were actually not complying with county law. So thank you for changing the county law so that farmers don't have to pay these urban engineers.
Very much. Well, thank you very much for spending your evening with us tonight, too. Thanks so much. Anybody else? Okay, seeing no movement in the crowd, we're going to close the public hearing on 2417. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 2417 as amended.
Bill number 2417 is amended, an ordinance concerning erosion and sediment control, grading permits, agricultural buildings.
Any discussion by my colleagues? Seeing no movement, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 2417 as amended.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka. Aye. Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill 2417 is passed.
All right. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 2517.
Bill number 2517, an ordinance concerning zoning agritourism.
Okay. We got a full house up here now, don't we?
Yes, it's just vote.
All right. Mr. Marsick, you're on.
The hearing was concluded on this bill, Mr. Chairman. We have amendments to offer at the appropriate time.
Okay. Anybody? All right, seeing nothing. All right, Madam Secretary, please read the bill, title of Bill number 2517. That's after that.
Read it again.
I generally think Joanne usually is right. But
I
Always
believe we
is a
read the
better
bill
answer.
in for
We'll
vote.
read it again.
Yes, sir. Bill number
Thank you.
2517, an ordinance concerning zoning agritourism.
All right, any discussion? Seeing none. Okay, we have, there are amendments on Bill 2517. All right, Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, this amendment removes the definition of farm product distribution center, removes farm product distribution centers as a conditional use in residential districts, and removes the conditional use requirements for farm product distribution centers.
All right. Motion to adopt?
So moved. Second.
All righty. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, just introduce the folks here again. Fire Marshal John Lane, Lynn Miller from Planning and Zoning, Lisa Barge from Economic Development, Kelly Kenny from Office of Law, Bill Bryant from Inspection and Permits. As we discussed at the last hearing on this bill, there are several concerns that were addressed by people impacted by agritourism. We met with those folks and came forward with these 6 amendments that are before you. As you all know, sometimes it's challenging for bills to be read, so our hope is that these amendments will be adopted and we can go back to this group to make sure all of the concerns have in fact been addressed. I shared these amendments with you. I apologize I did not share Amendment 6 over the weekend. I meant to do that and I did not, but I did share Amendments 1 through 5 with you on Friday at some point. So Amendment number 1, this removes this definition of farm product distribution center, which was requested by the members of this community. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marks, thank you for showing these ahead of time. At the last meeting, I asked a question about the concerns from the State Critical Area Commission. I don't think there's anything in Amendment 1, but I would ask if you do have an amendment that addresses those, if you could let me know to that at the appropriate time.
I will. I don't think we have any of the, I never saw any of the concerns from the Critical Area Commission.
Okay, well.
Maybe Kelly did or Lynn did.
Okay, well, we can talk about that at the end, I guess. But I don't have a specific question on Amendment 1. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker.
I just want to say in advance, I've had time to look at these. Thank you, Mr. Marzik, for sending them around. And the feedback I've gotten from the farm community and ag community is supportive, so I will be voting for all of these.
Okay, sounds like a thing. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Amendment number 1.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
All right, Madam Secretary, please read Amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment removes the definition of equestrian center, removes equestrian centers as a special exception used in residential districts, and removes the special exception use requirements for equestrian centers.
Motion to adopt.
So move.
Get a second? All right. Administration?
Same issue with this amendment, Mr. Chairman. This was a section that members of the community asked to not be considered with this bill, and we plan to address this with future legislation dealing with equestrian centers in the county. So we'd ask for your support.
Okay. Any question for the council? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Amendment number 2.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
All right, Madam Secretary, please read Amendment number 3.
Amendment number 3. This amendment removes the conditional use requirements this amendment removes from the conditional use requirements a condition relating to day camps for stables or riding clubs.
All right, motion to adopt.
So move. Second.
All right, administration.
Mr. Chairman, again, this language was found to be unnecessary due to other sections of the code dealing with boarding houses and bed and breakfast, so we had asked that this would be removed from the bill.
Okay. Any discussion for anybody? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Amendment number 3.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 3 is adopted.
Okay, moving on down the road here. Madam Secretary, please read Amendment number 4.
This amendment revises the definition of agritourism and revises the conditional use requirements to include a sole condition related to occupancy.
Motion to adopt.
So move.
Oh, there we go, tag teaming it. Okay. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, again, one of the requests from the community was to remove the conditions that were in the bill. So what this does is actually just set up so that there is a condition that It would meet the, the state code for these assessments, as well as for the water quality plan by the Soil Conservation District. So this removes the other conditions from the bill.
All right. Any questions? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 4.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 4 is adopted.
Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 5.
Amendment number 5. This amendment revises the definition of primary and value-added agricultural processing to require a product or ingredient be grown or produced on the farm.
That's a good thing. Motion to adopt?
So move.
A second? Second. All right, we're there. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, this is just a minor amendment to change the definition of this so that it's ingredients or products.
Okay, any questions from the council? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 5.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 5 is adopted.
Okay. Coming down the home stretch. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 6.
This amendment, amendment number 6, this amendment revises a condition for agritourism to provide that where public occupation of an agricultural building for agritourism exceeds 50 occupants, the use shall be limited to a ground floor level, and the building shall be inspected by the fire marshal, and expands a certain exception to the building permit requirements for agricultural buildings to include those that are open to the general public where the use is limited to a ground floor level and 50 occupants, or where the building is inspected by the fire marshal.
All right, can I get a motion to adopt?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Roger that. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Gray's explanation really explains exactly what this does. This was a safety issue. When we removed the other conditions for the requirements for agritourism, inspection and permits, and the fire marshal had suggested we have a provision in there for safety for these larger groups over 50 people so that they have access to an exit on the first floor, as well as meeting the fire code. We would ask for your support on this.
Okay. Ms. Tate?
I have a question in reference to this amendment as it relates to the prior amendment that strikes out all the provisions under the conditional use for agritourism. My understanding, the remaining provision was the public or invited guests shall occupy buildings constructed and approved for public use under a lawfully issued building permit. So it appears that this amendment is making it so they don't need a building permit to have the public in their space. So which, am I missing something? I mean, it doesn't have the 50 guests or the magic 50 number, so if you're under 50 guests, you can party in a building without a permit. So, right. I mean, this is a real deviation from everything we've done in the past and objections from inspections and permit in the past. And so I just want to make sure I understand what the remaining condition under agritourism means as far as this occupancy thing, because it says you need a permit here, and under here it says you don't need a permit. So which is it?
Right, for the record, Kelly Kenny, Senior Assistant County Attorney. So this amendment would replace what is currently there as condition number 4. So the language that you're talking about, the building permit language, would be replaced with this language that's shown in the amendment. So there would no longer be a building permit requirement for these buildings. And it
So
also
we're getting
includes-
rid of the conditional use altogether in this amendment?
No, this is the sole condition for agritourism.
Yeah, but this amendment is under the exemptions. So is my understanding this amendment exempts them from having to get a permit, right?
Well, there's 2 parts of the amendment. So the first part would make this, what's numbered 4 in the amendment, the sole condition for the agritourism use, the conditional use. And then also there's changes to the building permit, or to the construction code, which would change the requirements for building permits for agricultural buildings.
Right, they are not, okay.
Does
I
that
just
make
want to
sense?
make sure they need to, because it makes it sound like they don't need a permit. Do they need a permit or do not need one?
They do not need a permit under this amendment.
Okay, but under the conditional use provision, they do need a permit.
No, under this new conditional use, this one condition that's set forth in the amendment, they would no longer need a permit. So the language that's in the current bill says that they need a permit, that's going to be replaced with this language here. So the new requirement, the condition will be that if the occupancy is over 50 for agritourism, then a fire inspection will be required.
Okay, because that's not what the amendment says. 'Cause the amendment strikes out, I just want to be clear about this, because it says it strikes out lines 17 through 29. So the only section that remains under the prior amendment is sub 4, which is now the only condition.
Right, you're talking,
Right.
with the prior amendment that just passed, the only
Right.
condition that would remain would be condition number 4. So then this amendment strikes lines 31 through 34, which is condition number 4 in the current bill, and replaces it with the new language.
Okay, so that's that I'm trying to explain, that the prior amendment that the council just passed makes it so you still need to have a building permit if you're going to have people occupy the space for the agritourism. Now, this amendment is saying that you no longer need a permit to have people entertaining your space, as long as somebody out there says there's less than 50 people in there. That's
Correct.
certain somebody, I don't know who that is. So I just want to clarify that for the record, that the council is shifting positions based on the prior amendment that they just voted for, right?
I think that would be a fair
Okay.
statement. Mhm.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker.
So just to clarify, with the permit that, so if it's above 50 people, is that 50 people in the structure, or is it 50 people at the event? So, I mean, I've been to events on farms that would fall under this category, and there are ag structures there. Maybe there were more than 50 people there. How do you plan on handling that situation? So if the event is not necessarily, if it's open to the people who are attending the event, but the event is predominantly outdoors, is it limited to 50 people in the thing at one time if you're taking tours through it, or is it just 50 people for any event that shows up on the?
Right, that's correct. So it's 50 people in the building at
In the
any one
structure.
time. Now, there can be more people that are outdoors.
Okay. All right. And so what happens if somebody starts off and builds an ag building without the intent of having folks in there, and then decides, oh, well, maybe I want to have more than 50, then they have to come back to the county and request a permit?
No, they would need to
inspection
get
permit to come back out to inspect it, or?
They would have to have the fire marshal come out and inspect it.
Okay. So it wouldn't be inspected from a construction standpoint, because they're exempted from that.
Right.
Based on the ag piece. It would just be an inspection. And would it be for each event, or is it just a one-time blanket, the fire marshal inspects it and then it's done?
I think Chief Lane can answer that, but my understanding that it would just be, it would not be for each event. Once the building is inspected and deemed that it's appropriate for public entry, then I think they would be okay.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Chief? Just to clarify. I'm just trying to get clarification for folks, is all.
Yeah, what happens is, and the number 50 comes from, because that's the definition of an assembly. So once you have 50 or more people, it's considered an assembly, and different aspects kick in from the fire code. So we would go out and look and say that this space here has a maximum capacity in it. We go out and we do measurements and look at it, and we take in consideration if it's 50 to 150 people, then we make sure there's adequate exits. Are they doing it during the day? Does it need emergency lighting? Does it need exit signs? Does it have the big barn doors that slide open because they don't count as a door? They might have to keep them open during the events. So we take all that in consideration and look at that from the fire code aspect as an umbrella underneath the state fire code.
So then you would give them like a laundry list of things. Here's what you need to do.
Correct.
If you're going to have events over 50 people.
Correct, and then it'll be if it's over 50, then we'll issue a capacity certificate. If you've been through the hallway here, there's one on
Posted
the
on the-
right-hand side, and
Yeah.
that's the same thing that we would issue them to say you can have a maximum of this amount of people in this area at any given time.
Okay. But short of that being there, the assumption is that if it's, as long as it's less than 50, they're fine? Short of a sign being up?
Correct, because it's not an assembly then. Our concerns were for once it gets into groups, large groups of people into the assemblies.
Sure.
So if they have a farm which has 5 or 6 different things that are on the farm that people are coming to look at, not everybody's going to be at the same place at the same time. But if they have a special gathering into, say, a barn or an open
Riding arena or
a tractor where 3 sides are closed and it's open on one side, and they want to gather more people there because of a special event or anything like that, we would go ahead and take a look at that.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ms. Tate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a follow-up question to that. So if the building is built without a permit, should the occupancy always be 50? According to this provision?
It would be a maximum to 49.
Okay. So if you came out and you had to inspect it, you would still say to them, you can have 50 people in this, or 49 people in this building because it doesn't have a permit. when it
According
was
to this
built.
amendment, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair? Oh, sorry.
Good. Mr. Peruka?
Just quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just to, everybody says to clarify, so, but then one of the clarifications got me confused. If you don't need a permit, but you need permission, what form does that permission take? In other words, if the fire marshal has to come in and see, you have the situation where he has to come and inspect it, then okay, so it's approved. So what? I mean, is there a letter of understanding, or I mean, what form would that take?
If you're talking about spaces greater than 50?
Yes.
Then we would issue what they call an occupancy certificate or a capacity certificate.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Because we know it's a farm use, it's just that once you get above 50 in the life safety code, you're getting to an assembly area, which there's more stringent guidelines than just your general small building.
That's what you explained. Okay. Thank you. I got
Yes,
it
sir.
now. Appreciate it.
Mr. Walker?
One other question, too. Just I want to make sure. So if a building has already been built under the ag provision, they're grandfathered, so to speak, in that they're not going to be treated differently in some different way. They can still call, just like somebody who's going to build a building now, have the fire marshal come out, inspect the facility, just as if they're building a building currently.
Correct.
They're not treated differently.
That's my understanding with this amendment. If they have existing buildings now and they want to, as part of this agritourism, bring an assembly of people greater than 50, they're to contact us and we're to come out and take a look at the building and make sure that it meets all the general guidelines of fire safety.
Thank you. Ms. Barge, do you happen to know if Soil Conservation has a list of all of the folks who have already built structures under that? I'm just concerned about notification is all, I
They
guess.
have farm plans for various farms in the county, and it would list the ag buildings on the farm plan.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, before the vote on this, if there are more amendments, please send them to us. We'll obviously circulate this bill to the interested parties and that have been involved with this, but we have 2 more opportunities to amend this bill, so we're hoping to get it passed. If you have any suggestions, please let us know.
Okay, anybody else? All right, so Madam Secretary, you want to call the roll on amendment number 6?
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 6 is adopted.
Okay, bill number 2517 as amended will be heard on June the 5th, 2017. Madam Secretary, please read the title of bill number 2717 as amended.
Bill number 2717 is amended, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development modifications.
Okay, this is my bill. All right, for some of you folks in the audience and watching, might want to know how we all came about this thing. A month or so back, the administration came in with a piece of legislation addressing cluster bills. And through a whole bunch of different amendments and everything, I think a lot of people felt like it wasn't really being properly addressed. So I always have a philosophy: when both parties walk away mad, that's when you know you have a fair bill. Unfortunately, the only ones that walked away mad was the public, and the business owners walked away with a big smile on their face. That tells me you got a problem. So I turned around and I said, okay, let's look at this cluster situation again, and let's try addressing this issue. And soon to find out that cluster development was developed years ago to allow intense development, but also to provide extreme environmental protections. So it's a win-win street for the developer, get to build their houses in an intense situation, and it's a win for the environment because the environmental features of a cluster development are covered. Unfortunately, what has happened is that people have taken advantage of a loophole in our law, and it's called a modification. And so what happens is the developers turn around and they're not happy alone that they can just build massive developments, but what they do is they put in for modifications to attack the environmental features of this cluster development. And remember, it was a 50-50 partnership. Build your houses, don't mess with the environment. So what happened is that I asked Mr. Tom through an email, where is most of the modifications made? And he said usually in 3 areas. Was open space, recs, and forestation. So again, we had a partnership here with the developer and the environmental part. And so what has happened is the developer is coming through a loophole and now is attacking the other side of the deal. And so what I said to myself was, okay, let's put a piece of legislation in that doesn't allow them to attack the environmental aspect. And the first part of the legislation was that they weren't allowed to mess with the forestation, the open space, and the rec area, because that's what cluster development was about. Everybody was happy. And so that seemed to be like I was pushing it up the road, up on the hill a little bit here, that some people weren't going to go along with this deal. So I had to sweeten the deal up a little bit. And so what I did is I went back and I put an amendment in that says, okay, well, don't mess with the environmental features. Don't mess with the open space. Don't mess with the forestation. And you want to go ahead and mess with the rec area, you want a bunch of obesity taking place in Arundel County, then you go right ahead. But I wanted 2 things covered. And I don't really personally think that that's asking a whole lot, considering it was a partnership between the developers and the environmental. So what I've done now is I've closed their loophole. And I've said, you can mess with all kinds of modifications, but you can't touch these 2 things. And it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. And which way people are going to vote in this deal. And so my bill stands on its merit as it is. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Mars, the County Executive's Office. With me at the table is Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law and Larry Tom from Planning and Zoning. The County Executive continues to oppose this bill. As we stated at the last hearing, we feel this bill really ties the hands of the Planning and Zoning Officer really in an unnecessary fashion. Ms. Gray is handing out a document to respond to the questions that were raised at the last hearing on modifications in the county. You'll see that the numbers that were thrown out at the last meeting were simply incorrect, and we wanted to clarify that for the record for the council. If you look closely at the chart, beginning on the bottom, the total number of modifications for all development in the county we'll do calendar year 2016, was 583. Of those that were approved, it's 478. So of that 478 that were approved, only 46 dealt with cluster development. These are a very small number of modifications. Again, we feel that this does tie the hands. And then if you look in the bottom number here, I wanted to put on the record as well that Mr. Tom has given me permission to say that he was incorrect with his assessment of the modifications as it relates to the categories that Mr. Grasso was referring to. The numbers are at 7 of those modifications dealing with forest conservation, recreation area, and open space area. So it's a very small number. And then if you look forward, the numbers have for the calendar year so far this year are in the second column, going down in the same category. So Again, for this reason, we would ask you to oppose this bill as it's unnecessary.
Okay, so let me throw my part in here. I'm going to say my part. So we're looking at the approved ones in a whole year was 7. January through April, which is basically 4 months, is 2. So we haven't even finished out the whole year. So if it's such an insignificant problem, then why wouldn't you support the bill? To me, that makes sense, because if it's not a big deal, why not support it? Because obviously, according to Mr. Tom, per his email, that most of the modifications are in there. Now, one of the councilmen brought up last council that, that increase in density isn't something that can happen. And in fact, the administration has said, if it's R5, it's R5. You're not going to exceed R5. And I couldn't agree with them more. They're right about that. The problem is when you put a cluster development down, way that land is situated, might be an R5, but they might only be able to do 2 houses. And so what happens is they can go up to 5. We know the net's probably 3.5, somewhere around there. But what they do is they go to the forestry, to Larry Tom, and they say, okay, we need a modification on the open space, modification on the forestry, so they can put that extra 2 houses in to max out whatever that zoning is. So in my personal opinion, I think you kind of made my case over here, because it basically said is that what I'm asking for is really insignificant, and if it's so insignificant, then support the bill. Anybody else? Damn, you all starting, you just kind of just not moving today. Mr. Walker?
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on the numbers. So the column CY, it's calendar year 2016. There were only 46 modifications for cluster subdivisions in the whole county.
That's right. This Larry Tom, for the record. That's correct. You're interpreting that correctly.
Okay, and then so if they're not, so if only 7 of those 46 were for the areas that you outlined here, forest, con, rec, and open space, what were the other ones for? Just out of curiosity, what types?
Well, as I explained at the last hearing, a lot of these have to do with process. For example, as you know, in the subdivision process, you're dealing with 3 steps, basically. The final step being a grading permit or a plat recordation. Okay. The first step would be your sketch plan, and then you would have your final. Sometimes, if the project is small enough, a lot of the testing that would have occurred in later phases, such as in a final plan approval, is taken care of in the first step. So we might get a modification request to skip the final plan and after the sketch plan has been approved, and then move to grading permit. This is particularly in the case where we can test APF in the first step, and all the tests have been passed. The other indication is time extensions and so forth. Okay. There are other environmental. There are other modifications that deal with other environmental sections of the code, such as a removal of a specimen tree or steep slope modifications. So,
one of the folks that I talked to between now and the previous meeting also mentioned that, and I guess I just wanted to get your clarification or take on this, that sometimes the modification request is a result of a meeting they had prior to their request with you. So I know we kind of talked about the fact that there's a negotiation sometimes that takes place. So part of a modification is part of a negotiation to say, okay, we want this change, and you say, okay, yes, but you need this, that, and the other thing first. Right. So is there, my understanding is that part of the situation often is that they're coming to you in advance of the request for the modification, and there's a negotiation that takes place, and then, then as a result of that negotiation, they ask for the modification.
Our approach in the department is to try to minimize the number of modifications throughout the process. So we will spend a considerable amount of time working with the applicant and his design team to make adjustments to the site plan so that we can minimize the amount of modifications. The other thing that's important too, when you're dealing with these raw numbers, we indicated in the calendar year 2016 that we had 583 applications for modifications. These are inclusive also of modifications for non-residential projects as well. So if you look at the authority for modifications, which is under 17.210, I believe it's 108, that's not only just, that's the article that deals not only with residential subdivisions, but with non-residential commercial site development plans. So, right. And again, I want to emphasize that under the same provision, I cannot grant a modification for critical area, nor can I grant a modification for bogs or APF testing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith.
So, Mr. Tom, last year when we passed that resolution, and we asked for some analysis, I guess, over cluster development, this is kind of the direction I was kind of asking you to go into. Like, take the 46, for example. I'm still lost on why we can't get the 46 or even the 7 that were approved, but certainly the 46, and do some assessment and say, well, why was this development put this way? Or because 46 is not a lot, and especially 7. So I'm confused on why we still can't produce a report that says the 46 or the 7, whichever one is choose, this is why those decisions were made, because that is not a lot of numbers. And I truly believe that some cluster analysis could be performed on this data sample. Is it me, or do you not have enough staff to look at?
Well,
I mean, we turned this around in like 2 weeks. This was 2 weeks.
Right.
Mr. Smith, these are the numbers that you requested, the council requested at the last meeting.
Yes.
We answered the questions that were asked.
Right.
You've asked us numerous questions. You've asked us numerous things. As I've explained several times in these hearings, if you did an analysis of these changes that were made and these modifications, it's going to be very subjective. You ask one person if it's good, they're going to say yes. You ask another person, they're going to say absolutely not, it's a terrible thing.
Right. Because the context of and forgive me if I'm reading too much into your request, but the context of your request as related to Bill 9416 was to quantify whether cluster subdivisions are good or bad. And as I've stated for the record many times during the testimony of 9416, I can't quantify that because...
So even if you can't tell me if it's good or bad, if you show me what your analysis was on it, I'll make that determination. That's fine. Right. If you don't want to make it for me. But this is kind of the direction I was thinking we were going to get something like this. I mean, this is just a sort of 10,000 foot sort of purview or view of how many we've done. Right. But I'm sure these 7 could be rationalized or at least analyzed to an extent that we can produce some value out of it,
Mr.
some
Smith,
assessment of it.
If you ask us questions, we'll answer your questions, Mr. Smith. You've been saying, respectfully, you've been saying for several weeks that you're going to be following up with us and asking us questions, and we haven't gotten the questions on this.
I asked them on the record.
And we answered them on the record, and then you said you're going to propose more, and we haven't gotten those back.
Can we analyze those 7, Mr. Tom?
Sure, we can analyze.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But let me just suggest something to you.
There.
Let me just suggest something to you. With all respect to the council, right? We're not looking at cluster subdivisions. That's still in the code. We're focusing strictly on this bill, which has to do with modifications.
Check. And part
so
of...
I don't know how...
Got it. I'm saying as a legislator, for me, I like to understand how things evolve and get to where they're at. I don't like to just, like I said, throw the analogy I used before, throw spaghetti on the wall and just pick noodle and see which noodles stick. I really want to understand how we even got to the 7. Because that'll help me when it comes to decision, when it comes to zoning and everything else. So just for my own internal sort of knowledge, I mean, I'm all about, you tell me a time, I'll be at the planning and zoning office, I'll come down there to educate myself on this whole process.
We'll be happy to do that.
Okay, all right. Got a date?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Baruka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Tom. May I just, I want to ask one question, really kind of a clarification of what Mr. Walker was talking about, and then make one other comment as well. The question is this: with respect to modifications, It's from my conversations with you and others in your office, and also for people in the building community. Mr. Walker was, I think, saying that because you're having discussions about the property, you're going to, by nature of your discussions, you're going to minimize the necessity for modifications, or you're trying to minimize the amount of them.
That's correct.
But the other point that I've been told is that because you enter into, if somebody proposes a modification, and you, let's say that there were reasons that you might deny it, but then because of those negotiations, you would end up granting it, but not granting it in its original form. It would be massaged somehow or changed.
Or we may apply conditions to it.
Okay, so that it would therefore minimize not only the amount of modifications, but it would minimize the amount of denials. That's the point I'm getting to, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's my understanding. I just wanted you to nod your head when I said it.
That's right.
Okay?
No, that's a good observation.
The other thing is that it's also been my understanding, and this would be confirmed from my own knowledge of property law, that since all properties are different, no two pieces of property, real estate, are the same, at least in theory, then at the base of every zoning decision, it seems to me that there must be built in for the professional it's dealing with it some measure of flexibility. So that would be why I would pause it at the idea of absolutely eliminating modifications. Because if you did that, it would take away that what I would consider to be an essential requirement of flexibility. That's not to say that that's not to say that I'm in favor of wild misuse of that. But it seems to me that at the base of every real estate decision, there has to be some measure of flexibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker?
Of the 7, we removed the rec area with the amendment last meeting, correct? So of the 7 that are listed here, were any of those rec area?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay. Is there a way to find that out, just out of curiosity?
We can massage that further.
Thank you. Just curious.
Massage that. I like
I'll
that.
study them and let you know. I'm going to.
Okay, let's see where we're at over here. All right. With that being said, anybody else? Okay, so we're going to open up the public hearing on 2717. If you folks want to chime in, please come on down and say a few words. Keep it 2 minutes, name and address, and away we go.
Good evening, gentlemen, and Legislative Council as well. I'm Ann Fligston. My address is 1337 Kinlock Circle, Arundel, Maryland, 21012. I just want to make it clear, I thought I heard someone talk about this as only this was all development. The bill is only for cluster development, which we've talked about, Mr. Pruka, is a choice that you can make. And there's something different about these numbers because and maybe it's 2 years, 1 year was overlapping, I don't know, but there were 13 modifications on one of the projects that I'm familiar with. And these are small pieces of property, and that's where apparently most of the modifications come from. And in the bill that you didn't pass, it was only going to be for parcels 5 acres and below that you couldn't have those particular modifications. And I know when we started this out, this was a citizen kind of push to try to fix the cluster development that over the years had really devolved into a broken program. I think that's why you all voted to look at cluster and to make it better. Well, we don't have anything that made it better because we don't have that bill. And this Mr. Grasso's amendment or his bill would clear one of the biggest hurdles that we've had, because these modifications are very difficult to follow. They're not posted online on time. They're sometimes a couple months later. And it's just not the right kind of I think for the environment to be able to do all these, when you're saying you're doing cluster, which is supposed to have an environmental component, this is not the where to have all these modifications, and we've seen the results, and it doesn't help the environment. So I would just say that this is a very minimal step in trying to close some of the loopholes in cluster. Thank you.
All right. Sir? You're next. Let me hit the lady over here. You want them to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mr. Pazan. Go ahead. Bring it on.
All right. Elliot's far more eloquent. I was going to let him go first. Eric DeVito, 481 Old Orchard Circle, Millersville, Maryland. I don't have a ton of prepared remarks. I actually, was, as a board member of MBIA, was reading the bill, and a lot of people were asking me, can you interpret this bill for me? And I got to say, I'm scratching my head a little bit, because the very first provision in the bill says a modification is not required to pay into a fee in lieu fund. That is a big modification that faces a lot of developments in this county, and believe me, developers would love to just automatically pay a fee in lieu instead of having to ask for a modification. So that one threw me off a little bit. Then it's now saying with the forest, yes, you can't get a modification for it, but now you can just pay a fee in lieu. So in essence, you can automatically cut down a tree and not have to get a modification for it. So I'm honestly confused with what the bill is really trying to accomplish. I know what it's trying to accomplish, but I don't know that it is. And I also know that most of the modifications that I'm involved in, I can't say, and the numbers that Mr. Tom read, I don't know that I've ever been involved with a project that's asked for modification on open space. Most of the modifications I'm involved with are probably to take down a specimen tree, and that's usually because a developer goes in, shows a layout, and the county asks them, hey, can you move the road here? Can you save this batch of trees? Can you save this cluster of trees, which are higher quality, but that means putting a road there? And we say, well, that means we have to take down a specimen tree. So be it. Ask for a modification to take down that specimen tree because you're saving a more high-quality forest over on the other side of the job. Those are typical modifications that I'm involved in, and it is for much better planning. And so to just completely eliminate modifications, I think, is a huge mistake. I understand the concerns. We tried to work with Ann to come up with something, and I think there's still an opportunity to come up with something that works for everyone, but I don't think a blanket disallowance is the answer. Thank you.
Okay. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Elliot Powell, Whitehall Development. Speaker on here. Thank you. Lousy developments don't result from the granting of modifications. Lousy developments happen because of bad planning, and they do happen. Just like an ugly house might get built next to you, it's just an ugly house. The granting of modifications comes as a result of, as Mr. Tom says, a lot of angst. When you come in and make an application for it, they try to either talk you out of it or work out other ways to solve your problems. And when they are granted, there's a lot of quid pro quo. You end up granting more buffers, more stringent stormwater management. So I submit that if you actually sit down and examine the 4 or 5 or so modifications that were granted, I don't know which ones they were, but I would be surprised if there wasn't some other enhancement that was that resulted in that development by the granting of the modification. So the modification granting it's an incredible tool. It's a great tool, just as there is in life. I mean, as I think Mr. Perkins said, there's very stringent rules out there, and no two properties are the same. So the flexibility granted to the planning zoning officer is just that. It's a tool. And I think that, and I appreciate Councilman Smith's desire to kind of lift up the tent there a little bit and peek under there, because you'll find, I believe, that there really is no ugly development that resulted from the granting of a modification. It's just when those few examples that do exist is because they're ugly developments, and fortunately they're few and far between. They're not his projects or my projects, might add. Thank you very much.
Even, ma'am?
I will agree. I don't know if it's their projects or not that I've seen. I would again urge you to support this bill. Responsible developers don't really need to be granted a lot of modifications. But developers seem to use this cluster development classification to develop what could be hard to develop properties. And using modification after modification, developers are now able to use to completely negate the original intent of the cluster development classifications. I've been attending a recent hearing where a downhill community is concerned about the effects of the uphill development. And it has gone modification after modification. It came out during the hearing, and one of the requirements of the cluster is it can't be a more maximum density than what would be under conservative or traditional development. Well, it came out during the hearing that the county had never even calculated the approvable development lots, and then granted the cluster development classification. And it's in the records for this hearing that this county lawyer in the county said, oh, it's an R5 parcel, very hard to develop. And with the traditional development, they never even knew what kind of lots could be developed. But they granted the R5 to the developer. And all we're asking is that the county council protect us from irresponsible development. And we're only asking for, we're not asking you to not develop, just to consider the people of Anne Arundel County in their developments. I didn't prepare anything really well. No. And I guess that's it.
All righty. Sir? Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. My name is Anthony Brent. I live on the Mayo Peninsula. So I'm going to actually have to agree with Mr. Smith on this because this is a point where we on the Mayo have been really actively looking for is data points. As you know, we're trying to really push for the general development plan as well as the small area plans to be started as soon as possible. So we also see Bill 2717 as a way of pausing while data is gathered so that we can effectively plan and see where the shortfalls are. So by analyzing the data points of where modifications have been made, we can see where the desire is for development and in what type on our peninsula, and not only our peninsula, but the rest of the peninsulas and the county as a whole. So we would actually like to see this plan go forward, and we would actually like to ask that the amendment from last week be rescinded to include the recreation spaces, as long as they are also including in the public development pieces. So we would like to ask for that as well, because as this gentleman said, we absolutely agree. It's the ugly plan which creates the ugly problems, which we have to, as a county and as a local community, go back to and spend millions on fixing, because we don't have the comprehensive planning in place as we go forward in doing the development. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else want to come down and speak on 2717? Seeing no movement in the crowd, want to close the public hearing on 2717. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 2717 as amended.
Bill 2717 is amended, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development modifications.
Any discussion? Seeing no movement, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on 2717.
Mr. Pruski.
No.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
No.
Mr. Smith.
Nay.
Mr. Fink.
No.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
2 in the affirmative, 5 in the negative. Bill 2717 is defeated.
Okay. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 2817.
Bill number 2817, an ordinance concerning finance, taxation, and budget, admissions and amusement tax, agritourism.
All right. Administration.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Kelly Kenny from the Office of Law, Darcy Good from Finance, Karen McQuaid from Finance, and Lisa Barge from Economic Development. As we discussed at the work session, 2817 exempts agritourism operations from the admissions and amusement tax in the county. These tax rates are set by local officials around the state, and the tax is calculated as a percentage of the admissions and amusement receipts. The State Comptroller's Office collects the tax for the county, and our estimate is this results in about $15,000 annually in revenue for the county. We're trying to promote agritourism, as we've discussed at length at several meetings, to help farm owners and operators with businesses such as corn mazes, pumpkin patches, and other agritourism activities. We'll be offering an amendment at the appropriate time to address the change in the language in the previous bill, as these two bills are linked together from a definition standpoint. We'd be happy to answer any questions council has.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marzik, so you testified it's a pretty modest revenue generator. It's around $15,000. Does that just go in the general fund, or does that go? Okay, so it's infinitesimal. I mean, it has no impact. I mean, is what I'm saying.
In the scope of $1 billion.
Yeah.
It's a very
All right,
small.
so it's not earmarked to support ag programs or go to one department or the other. It just
general
dissipates into the $1.5 billion general fund. Okay. Madam Auditor, did you have something? I'll yield my time.
Madam Auditor.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the $15,000 number. As I wrote in my blue letter, that was just based on a grand assumption that everything must be in the miscellaneous category, because doesn't show up as agritourism anywhere else in the state's coding of the receipts. But when I spoke to the state, they said agritourism type businesses would be scattered throughout the categories that they have and not in miscellaneous. When I looked through all the businesses that paid during the one quarter, we get a list of the businesses that paid. I couldn't really see any that were obviously agritourism. So I'm thinking the number might even be much smaller than 15,000. Although I really can't see the detail, like we need to see it. So.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fink, how much does the amusement tax bring in the county, in general, from everything?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm not sure if anyone from the budget office would know that. Oh, here comes Huja.
He's got it.
He's got it memorized.
He's got it.
Huja Hassim from Budget Office. Amusement tax revenue is roughly $8 million from all sources. There is roughly 25 or 31 categories, and agritourism is not one of them.
How much was it? I'm sorry.
8 million.
8 million.
8 to 9 million. I forgot 8 and a half or 9 roughly.
Roughly right.
Good guess. Not bad. Not bad. And what the movie tax is that part of the amusement tax? Is that what the movies fall under?
Yes.
Golf, would that fall under amusement tax?
I don't know about golf.
Okay. The kids playing on the fields, they got to pay Lakeshore baseball. Does that fall under amusement tax?
No, that's not.
Oh, it's less than blue line. Sure, look at the blue line.
Just Lakeshore. Just Lakeshore.
Ay, ay, ay. Perfect. Thank you.
Ski slopes, riding, academics, all sorts of things. Billiards. It's a fascinating list on the second page of the blue letter.
Mr. Chair?
Madam Auditor.
Yes, I want to remind the council that there's 2 bills coming as a part of the budget process this year that are going to waive 2 other categories of these taxes. And my comments in the blue letter kind of go to all of this waiver of categories, about picking which ones you would like to waive and the reason behind that. The movie tax is one of these categories, and it is a significant source. The movie tax that's coming up for hearing in a couple weeks. Just wanted to remind you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Peruka.
Madam Auditor, may I just ask, I think I know the answer to this, but just to make sure, any of these waivers of these taxes, do they increase anybody else's taxes?
No, I don't believe so.
Anybody else? Okay, we're going to open up the public hearing on 2817. If anybody wants to chime in, 2 minutes. See no movement in the crowd. I'm going to close the public hearing on 2817. Is there any discussion? Okay, it looks like there's a couple amendments. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
I'm going to read the bill in first for vote, Mr.
I'd like
Chairman.
that. You go for it.
Bill number 2817, an ordinance concerning finance, taxation, and budget, admissions and amusement tax, agritourism.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, there's amendment to bill number 2817. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment removes equestrian center as a use exempt from the admissions and amusement tax.
Motion to adopt.
So moved. Second.
All right. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, we changed the definition in the prior bill, and those definitions are linked to this bill, which is why we're offering the amendment to take out equestrian center in the tax cut bill.
Okay. All right, questions? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka. Aye. Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
All righty, bill number 2817 as amended will be heard on June the 5th, 2017. Making our way down the list here. Madam Secretary, please read the title of bill number 2917.
Bill number 2917, an ordinance concerning current expense budget, transfer of funds, and supplementary appropriations.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Mars, the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Huja Hussein from the Budget Office, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. Bill 2917 transfers supplementary appropriations to Public Works, Social Services from the CAO Contingency Fund. This also allows for a variety of offices to receive grants that were not included in the operating budget via the grant fund. The transfer appropriations for Public Works is for snow removal. The transfer to Sarah's House is an agreement with the Department of Army for Sarah's House lease. We will be offering amendments at the appropriate time as well to correct some of the numbers in the bill. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
All right, anybody got any questions? All right. Let's open up the public hearing on 2917. Anybody want to come in and chime in? Seeing no movement, we're going to close the public hearing on 2917. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 2917.
Bill number 2917, an ordinance concerning current expense budget, transfer of funds, and supplementary appropriations.
Any discussion? No movement? All right, there's a couple amendments to Bill 2917, so we'll start off with the first one. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment corrects the amount and appropriation of funds for a grant to the Circuit Court.
Motion to adopt.
So move.
Second. Second, hear it. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, members of council, these are both amendments to address some issues that were raised by the auditor's office with some back and forth to correct numbers in this transfer.
Any questions? Seeing none. All right, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Hey.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
All right, Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment corrects the amount of a transferred appropriation of funds from the Chief Administrative Office Contingency Fund to the Department of Social Services.
Motion to adopt.
So moved.
All right, got it. Administration?
Same with this amendment, Mr. Chairman. This is for social services.
Any questions?
Mr.
Trumbauer.
Just a quick question to the auditor. This second amendment, this addresses all the concerns you raised in the blue letter?
Yes, they do. This particular one, they just don't need quite as much money in their budget because they have excess in other line items that they can use.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Anybody else? All right, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka. Aye. Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Aye. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
All right, bill number 2917 as amended will be heard on June the 5th, 2017. Madam Secretary, please read bill number 3017.
Bill number 3017, an ordinance concerning transfer of former Board of Education real property near Riva Road, Annapolis, Maryland, for Annapolis Corporate Park.
All right, administration.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Larry Tom from Planning and Zoning, and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. Bill 3017 approves the transfer of property from the county to the Truman Office Property Business Trust. This .156 acres was transferred to the county by the Board of Ed to execute a transfer on behalf of the board. This is a continuance of the MOU between Truman Office Property Business Trust and the county that began in 2012. This is the property located adjacent to the Heritage Complex. Ms. Glassmeyer, Mr. Tom, be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Trumbear?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is in my district, and I will, I support this, and I'll just give a few seconds of background. Some of you on the council may remember this was part of a three-way kind of land swap deal between the county, the Board of Ed, and the private landowner there for the property that is behind the Heritage Complex and the Board of Ed building, which used to be a giant dump. And there was a big cleanup that had to happen there. There were a couple stream restorations that had to happen there. And to make everything fit and make it all work, there was a bit of land that needed to be transferred, and all three parties were okay with it. And it was a big deal that was worked out. So just wanted to put that on the record and let you know that I support this. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, real quick.
Mr. Smith.
So this happened 5 years ago? Wow, it's the restoration and everything else took that long to actually be taken care of before this transfer? They paid us 5 years ago.
It's been done, I think. I think it's over with. I actually thought we had already done this, but I guess I was just remembering the signature, the approval of the MOU. I guess this is the final transfer.
I'll defer to Ms. Blair on that.
Yeah, let the record show she's nodding her head.
Okay.
The issue is that there's about 7 steps you have to go through to get the property from the board to the county and from the county for a private disposition. So now that we've finally jumped through all of the hoops that we had to get through for this .15 acres. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Gotta love it. Anybody else? Okay, we're going to open the public hearing on 3017. Anybody want to chime in? Seeing no movement, we're going to close the public hearing on 1317. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3017.
Bill number 3017, an ordinance concerning transfer of former Board of Education real property near Riva Road, Annapolis, Maryland, for Annapolis Corporate Park.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on 30-17.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill 3017 is passed.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of 3217.
Bill number 3217, an ordinance concerning zoning, administrative hearings, Board of Appeals, rezonings in residential districts.
Okay. This is my deal. Something else to kind of to stir the pot up a little bit more. What we basically have, folks, is development is, I believe, going rapid all over Anne Arundel County. And it's like Councilman Smith said earlier, it's just throwing a pot of spaghetti up against the wall and seeing what sticks. So my problem is that I'm not against development. Well, I really am. But let's be honest. I can't even lie to myself, can I? The truth of the matter is that I just think that if you're going to have development, that it needs to be done in a responsible way. All right? It's obvious if you live in North County, you can see that hasn't even happened. All right? And if you have any argument whatsoever, I just think you need to go to work and actually ride down Ritchie Highway or down 100 and see what's going on. In fact, just look at the schools, the overcrowded schools. So our adequate facility bill doesn't seem to be working too well. So Councilman Fink made a clear point that he called for a resolution at the last council asking for the GDP, Councilman Smith, sorry about that, to ask for the GDP to get done ASAP. And so that's basically giving us a comprehensive look of what we're actually developing in Anne Arundel County instead of throwing spaghetti up against the wall and hoping what sticks. So we can actually see if we're doing responsible growth through Anne Arundel County, because once it's there, it's there. And I've seen too many cases that, piece of property has gone from an R1 to an R15, and the argument that we'll use is, well, that's because what the neighbor has over here. That's what the surrounding area is. So I'll keep saying this argument over and over again. Just because something is there doesn't make it right, okay? And if you've got a massive development going right next to another one because it's already there, just look at the traffic flow, just look at the schools, look at the quality of life of the people. And to use precedence to move forward on putting another piece of development identical to what is there is a pretty stupid thing to do, all right? So I think when you have the GDP done, that you have a better look of what's going on. And there was a piece of property in Councilman Fink's area, where they turned around and they took it from an R1 to an R15. It's already a mess over there to begin with, and the last thing I think we'd want to do is continue the mess. But evidently, some people don't seem to feel that way. So they like living in Baltimore City, and I think that the people that moved to Anne Arundel County moved because they want the suburban or rural type of life. And if they wanted to live on top of each other, they probably would have moved in Baltimore City or stayed in Baltimore City. So folks, what's basically happened is our quality of life, okay, is deteriorating. And if you have any doubts, just go to work and see the traffic. And of course, many developers, I understand, some of them are here, and I like them. But in the same token, I'm certain that where they live, it's a nice rural setting, that they're not dealing with a bunch of traffic and whatever have you. Unfortunately, as a councilman, you are stuck to your district. Otherwise, I could turn around and move down to Mr. Walker's area where it's the nice wild and country life, and the horses run freely and the fox. And then I would say, okay, it's not a big deal, but there's a reason why each councilman has to live in their area, and that's so that they get to live day in and day out what their constituents are going through. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't think I've ever walked into a neighborhood and asked them, how do you feel about a new development, that he all said, yeah, let's put another one out. I've never seen anybody want more people where they live. Maybe out in the country because they're lonely, but not up in North County. We don't need any more people up there, and if we are going to entertain development, it needs to be responsible, not to make the mess that we've already got worse. So with that being said, administration, you're on.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Larry Tom from Planning and Zoning, Doug Holman, Administrative Hearing Officer, and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. The County Executive opposes this bill. And I'll highlight 3 reasons for our opposition of this. This proposes to limit the authority of the Administrative Hearing Officer as well as the Board of Appeals to prevent them from doing what is commonly called upzoning in residential areas. It establishes a moratorium on residential rezonings, but it doesn't address non-residential rezonings that result in residential areas. So essentially has a almost an artificial moratorium, if you will, on these upzonings. Second, it impacts the due process for people in the county to go through the Office of Administrative Hearings and the Board of Appeals, which act as the judicial branch within the county government on these rezonings. Both bodies, we believe, act independently and are fair arbiters on these decisions that they're making. Third, I think this, again, is really a solution in search of a problem. The handout that I've provided with you gives the history over the last 5 years of the issues going before the Office of Administrative Hearings. There have been only 14 rezoning cases involving residential rezoning requests. Of those 14, 6 involved rezoning non-residential property to a residential zone. And of the 14, 5 were denied by the Administrative Hearing Officer. And of those 5 denials, 2 went before the Board of Appeals where it was approved. Mr. Holman and Mr. Tom would be happy to answer any questions, but we would ask you to oppose this bill.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a legal question and then a policy question. The legal question to Ms. Blair. Can we do this? Can we pass? I mean, do you have any concern over the authority of the legislative branch to pass this bill?
Lori Blair Klossmeyer, Deputy County Attorney. Do you mean from the perspective of whether it's constitutional or
charter compatible, or I mean, typically typically the Office of Law hasn't been bashful about telling us when we can't do something. We did not get a memo saying we can't do this, but I just thought I'd ask.
Right. I've looked at two issues on this bill. One had to do with whether or not it was a taking.
Yeah.
The other.
It's not a taking.
It's not a taking.
Correct.
The other was whether or not there was some type of equal protection type violation by only applying it to residential property, and I didn't find anything on that either.
Okay. So to the best of your knowledge, it is not in conflict with our charter.
Correct.
Or the U.S. Constitution.
Correct.
Thank you. My policy question, which I had not considered until I looked at the auditor's blue letter, which mentions the Odenton Town Center. So is there a plan on the books now, Mr. Tom, that includes administrative hearings as part of the grander strategy for Odenton Town Center, or is that just something that the auditor flagged to bring to our attention?
The auditor is correct in what she stated to you.
Sure.
Understand, though, that the Odenton Town Center master plan is the governing document. And it's unique in a sense that not only is it a plan for future growth and development in the Odenton Town Center, but it also has regulatory authority apart and separate from the code.
So if this legislation were to pass in some shape or form similar to what it is now, would that impact significantly the administration's plan or the plan that you referenced for the Odenton Town Center?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it either, but okay.
I didn't delve that deeply.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I'm gonna throw up I had Ms. Tate go through and see what some of the people are. Okay. Have Ms. Tate go to planning and zoning and asked on what properties were being approved and denied. Now, I'm going to put it straight, folks, and I don't know how else to put it, and I'll probably get shot for this comment too, but it won't matter at this point. I don't think there's a lot of problems in our internal workings of our government, and I think campaign contributions got a lot to do with a lot of things. You could say what you want to say, but let the truth be as it may be. Ms. Tate's saying, I can't believe you just said that. Yes, you did hear me say that. So now let me just talk to you real quick, and let's go down the line here, and let's just see what's going on really. See, 2016, I'm looking at Brockbridge Landing Holding Company, Jessup. They went from an R1 to a C1 denied. Okay. And then I'm looking at Myers Timothy Deanne. She went from an R1 to an R2 in Millersville, approved. All right. Then I'm looking at Koch Riva Property Group, LLC, Pasadena, R1 to R15. Now, do you think that was denied or approved? Amazing enough, it was approved. How about that, huh? Wonder where the campaign contributions went there. Villas at the Severn Crest LLC, Severn, OS to R1 to R2, denied. Rivas at the Severn Crest LLC, Severn, R1 to R2, OS, denied. Two Farms, Inc., Pasadena, from an R5 to a C3, denied. Cop Bridge LLC, Jessup, SB to C1, denied. Here's an interesting one again. Koch Riva Properties LLC, Pasadena, R1 to R15. Surprisingly enough, approved. How about that? Okay, and let's see what else we've got here. 2017, 5 Pumphrey's Partnership, LLC. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if that's that Nightmare on Marley Neck Boulevard with 1,400 houses or not, but I don't have if it's been approved or denied. And then I got a Hogan Development, LLC in Severance from a C3 to an R15. Don't have an approved and denied. But I'm just kind of lost for words why these large pieces from R1 to R15 are approved by the same people. That's the part I'm confused about. Can you explain that, Mr. Tom?
Want me to answer that?
Please. Is this the zoning officer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice to meet you, sir. I've talked to you maybe once or twice, but maybe you can help me understand why the same name of the same person and the same R1 to R15 twice has been approved. Go ahead, you're on.
I don't remember the two cases you're talking about. I do remember the one that that's up at Wishing Rock. Is that plug us into the same?
That's the most recent one, and that is not here also. And that was also approved. That was a Koch property too, so now we got 3 of them.
I don't know whether.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, I don't know whether that was a Koch property. I don't.
Oh, it was.
Okay.
No, it was.
And the record should be clear that if I'm getting any donations from anybody, I don't know where they've gone. Somebody must have stolen them in the pipeline somewhere, because I didn't get them. But that property, I think it's very interesting that that property, which looks on paper really bad, okay, was surrounded by commercial property that this county council spot rezoned during rezoning recently, 2012. So you got a piece of property that's residential, and it's totally surrounded on all 4 sides. Well, the north side was R15, I think. But commercial, 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 commercial. I mean, to me, that's, and I have to say that anybody who reads my decisions will see a footnote that I borrowed from Judge Wilcox when he had my job, which says that you people decide, the county council decides how to rezone. I don't like doing rezonings. I think it's your job, not mine. I'm alone, I'm not 7 people, and I don't have all the evidence put in front of me. It's put in front of you people. So I may be giving away house secrets, so some of the lawyers will tell you this. It's tough to get me to bounce to a yes.
Well, the problem that I'm constantly hearing from these meetings is that the lawyers are using the argument that the council made a mistake. So I'm going to put it on the record. We didn't make a mistake. So the next time you see council come before you and say that we made a mistake, no, we didn't. We all zoned our areas that we felt were best for our people. Just like during comprehensive zoning, I had developers come to me, which is one before you, might be coming to you, behind Cheeseburger Paradise. And they wanted me to go from R1 to R5. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. The traffic on Ritchie Highway is phenomenal. Well, how about R2, Councilman? Not a chance in the world. Now, comprehensive zoning is gone. Now they're coming back at it for another bite at the apple. And now they're coming your way to say, well, the council made a mistake. No, John Grassi didn't make a mistake. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was bugged to do that. I was bugged to upzone property on Crane Highway. I was bugged to put more upzoning on Jumpers Hole Road. And I said, no, 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 and no. But they didn't like that decision. So I'm telling you, in my district too, if any of these people come to you and say that the council made the mistake, you are looking at the person that said, no, I didn't make a mistake. So let me put that on the record to be clear.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. With that being said,
Mr. Chairman, I just want to put on the record, I hope your comments weren't directed at the county executive or Mr. Tom or the administration for any of these decisions, because we have no involvement in this process. So I'm not sure if they're directed at us, but if they are, I think that's pretty outrageous and offensive to the county executive. So.
Okay, as far as campaign contributions?
Absolutely.
Yes, they were. Okay? They were directed to anybody that takes campaign contributions.
That's absolutely outrageous, Mr. Chairman. I think it's way out of line for you to be making these allegations.
You could say what you want to say, and we're going to have another discussion like the one I had upstairs.
That's fine.
Okay? With that being said, we're going to open up the public hearing on 3217. Come on down. Anybody who wants to speak in? Okay, and I guess we'll start, ladies first. We'll go to our right over here. Please, your name and address.
Thank you, Councilman. My name is Jessica Ewing, and I live at 3455 Brookhaven Road in Pasadena. I'm in Mr. Fink's district. And we have talked at length about these development issues that we have on our peninsula. And I think that Mr. Fink has agreed with me on a lot of it, that we do need to do something and that comprehensive rezoning is important, and I don't think we have a debate there. What I will say is I have personally been in front of Mr. Holloman and have fought cases. The Wishing Rock property was one of the, actually the two farms, many of those Coke properties that you mentioned were ones that I was up against. I won some, I lost some. What I will say about it though is that many of these attorneys are going in there you can only get piecemeal rezoning if you have can prove that there's been a mistake or the character of the neighborhood has changed. And 9 times out of 10, what I'm facing is mistake. And it's difficult for me because there's mistakes on the small area planning map. And so I have to continually argue that the Lake Shore and the Fort Smallwood planning maps, there's some inconsistencies between the two. So what I would ask is your support for this bill, particularly Mr. Fink. I'm in your district. I drive it every day. Our peninsula is overcrowded and something's got to give. So I would ask for your vote on this bill.
Ma'am?
Okay. Ann Flixton again from Growth Action Network. I would also ask that you support this bill. The reason being, piecemeal rezoning is supposed to be an exception to the rule. In fact, the courts say that the burden of anybody applying for piecemeal rezoning, which is not during comprehensive rezoning, has an onerous burden. Said even if you prove a mistake and change in neighborhood, and it's an unanticipated change in neighborhood, not just any change in neighborhood, even then, the court doesn't have to give you rezoning. And we've been seeing a lot of rezonings, particularly I've noticed more since January. I know there are 2 this month. There were 2 or 3 since before that. And this should be a rare thing. And I think to keep putting off the GDP makes it harder because more and more people want their rezoning now. But I don't think that we should allow all these piecemeal rezonings when we should be doing a comprehensive rezoning. So I support the bill.
Okay. Ma'am? Name and address, please.
Lisa Bender, 712 Shore Road, Severna Park, Maryland. I also urge you to support this bill. The GDP was developed with a lot of thought and planning in an attempt to protect the beauty and the people of Anne Arundel County. It is becoming very evident that the county administration is apparently very pro-development, and developers appear to be more important than the citizens of Anne Arundel County. Many of the county residential areas, such as Severna Park and Arnold, have small area plans. Spot zoning, upzoning has been a very real ability to completely destroy the way and quality of life in these areas. I urge you to minimize the growth until a comprehensive GDP can be developed again.
Thank you. Sir?
Yes, my name is Anthony Brent. I live on the Mayo Peninsula. I again would like to voice our support for Bill 3217. We think it's a really good idea. This is yet another example of a simple step which allows the comprehensive planning to take place. As with the issues of ineffective piecemeal development we observe on the Mayo Peninsula, the county also needs a level of stability until comprehensive data collection and comprehensive planning can take place. Again, the ugly plans create ugly development. At that point, the development of the county can move forward in an effective manner. Here's a quick example. On the Mayo Peninsula, we have one intersection that services the entire peninsula. Currently, on average, we have over 27,000 vehicles going through that intersection in a day. Over the weekends, it bumps up to over 29,000. Currently, there are plans in place to allow for public and private development, as well as the parks, which will add another up to almost 5,000 cars and up to almost 15,000 additional people onto the peninsula. Just as a point of fact, our current population is only about 9,000 on the peninsula. So we're more than doubling that with the current plans that the county has in place for us. So does the county have a plan to mitigate traffic issues, drinking water issues, polluted bay and rivers, and overburdened fire, EMS, and law enforcement systems? We don't think so. We think it will be the same method as it is used now. Put something in place and then spend millions trying to fix it later on. This bill will help support the efforts as we go into the general development plan and the small area plans as we go forward, and we urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Sir. Mr. Chair.
Walker.
Ms. Flixon, just a question for you out of curiosity. since of the folks that are sitting here at the table, maybe Mr. Vivito aside, you've been here the longest in front of us, testifying on different issues. This whole issue of the general development plan continues to come up, and I think the council spoke already that we're supportive of bringing that sooner rather than later. My question is, based on the way the system is set up now, it happens only once every 10 years. Do you feel like it would be better if it happened on a more frequent basis?
Well, there are arguments for and against having it more frequently. I think that once you have a 2009 plan, we're also used to change. I think the development community doesn't like to wait. But I think if we're going to change the law, we have to change the law. And right now, piecemeal rezoning is supposed to be extremely rare. And I think because of the pressure, and there may not be a whole lot of land to rezone or to plan for if the pace of this rezoning continues.
Thank you. I mean, my feeling is that I think it does need to happen more frequently than every 10 years. I think that, this situation that we're running into with the peninsula, Mayo Peninsula in particular, has sort of brought that issue up probably to the surface. And I know that we've had this discussion on and off before over the past 5 or 6 years, but it just, because of these other issues that are popping up, it just seems to me that maybe we should mandate that it be happening more frequently rather than having longer gaps in between so that people feel like there's a larger plan in place that's more up to date. So, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Anybody else?
Actually, I would agree, but I would ask the question, since the general development plan is such a large major muscle movement for the county, would it be detrimental to try to do it in a more frequent pattern, or would it be better to do a incremental shift every 2 to 3 years to that?
Yeah. I mean, the issue is really the process. It is a huge lift. It's not an easy task, and I think that's what we were trying to convey at the last meeting when we passed that resolution, just knowing what all the things that are involved in getting that done. I'd love to see it done quick, but it really is one of those things that if it's done correctly, should take time. People should have the ability to have input into it. So maybe, and I was just kind of leaning over talking to Mr. Trumbauer about this over the last minute or two as well, and I think maybe if we were able to define a smaller window of time, and then also define a clear process, because that's another thing that seems to be lacking when we made the questions of the administration and Mr. Tom. There isn't, and I understand why, he's on his way out and stuff, so, he's reluctant to lock his, future successor into a process. But I think if there was one established in the code that everybody knew what the rules were in advance, and could anticipate those, then we wouldn't have I guess the ambiguity is what's causing everybody angst. And I think we spelled that out and shrunk the time window. That might be more beneficial for everyone involved. So.
And I think sometimes we just have to bite the bullet and make those choices.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sir, name and address, 2 minutes. Do I know who you are?
Eric DeVito again, 481 Old Orchard Circle, Millersville, Maryland. Just quickly, I am on the MBIA Board of Directors, and I think you all should have received a letter from MBIA opposing this bill with a number of reasons, and I'm not going to read all those, but I do, to answer Councilman Walker's question, Baltimore County does it every 4 years, automatically. Every 4 years, they go through their master plan. Everyone understands it, knows it, goes through it. It's something that I would welcome in this county, I think, but regardless, piecemeal rezonings are still actually a component of the comprehensive rezoning process. It's not overwhelmingly extraordinary. They're actually state law, a mountain of case law to do piecemeal rezonings. Like Ms. Ewing, I've won some, I've lost some. I've been involved in a couple of them. I've been involved in a mistake that was an absolute clear mistake. I know what you're saying. It wasn't a council mistake, but the county thought the property was part of Fort Meade. They rezoned every single parcel around it, R10. They left this one as R1, same zoning as Fort Meade, because they thought it was in the boundary of Fort Meade. I was able to prove that that was a mistake. It was private property. It was not. And it was able to get piecemeal rezoned through Mr. Holman. And believe me, it is not easy. 5 Pumphrey's, the one you listed on there that hasn't resolved, it was denied. Thought we put on an excellent hearing. We actually had a change argument that met the definition of the code because a road was going through. Still got denied. Public had a huge opportunity to participate. There's a Board of Appeals hearing process. Piecemeal rezonings are not easy, and they are not supposedly to be extraordinary. They're supposed to be, because we have a 10-year GDP process, to fill these holes that naturally exist after you complete a GDP process. So the last point I will make is sometimes counties will announce moratoriums when they announce that the GDP has been opened, however. They never just do it preemptively in the thought that there will be a GDP coming at some point. We don't even know when the GDP is going to be. So it's awfully premature to lock things down before a GDP when we don't even know when it's going to be. Thank you.
All right, Mr. DeVito, I'm just going to put something on the radar, okay? You said that the public has an opportunity to participate. They do. But I don't think there's too many people in the world that have a 10:30 in the morning to be able to show up for that. So just be prepared. I got a piece of legislation going in that says Mr. Holman's going to have his meetings at 7 o'clock at night so that people can show up. So that's part of the game.
Can I address that real quickly?
Please do.
My hearing, there were 35, possibly 40 people at it. Brought a petition with representing 57 others. I also think, honestly, I'm fine either way. I really am. I think that the details there, some people would rather not come to a hearing after work either. They'd actually prefer to deal with it in the morning. So I don't know that it's necessarily going to be an end-all be-all that you think it is, but I actually have no problem with it.
Thank you for your time. Sir, name and address, please.
William Kraus, Warfield Road, in Edgewater, Arundel. Mr. Chairman, I think the county's executive representative made some good points that I think should be addressed, but I don't think they're as supportive of him as he thinks. First position is this bill is bad because it limits the authority of the hearing officer. I would submit to you that that is part of the county council's representation's responsibility. Executive hearing officers' judgment and decisions are only as good as the law is clear. If you make the law clear, then you will get consistent, clear judgments. I would submit to you, you don't have that right now because you've got a lot of partial piecemeal zoning going on, and that's part of the reason why. This bill provides that clarity. It's appropriate for that reason. Second, he argues it's a due process violation, but the reality is that when you buy a piece of property, you know what it's zoned. It's not magically rezoned when you buy it. They don't hide the number under the deed so you don't know what you're getting. So there's no real due process denial, with the possible exception of all the people around it who don't get a chance to respond. The third element is that this is a solution in search of a problem. I would submit to you that the problem, gentlemen, is the 2008 moratorium, which is about to come off like a snake in a can. This is a proactive step that the council should take because it puts teeth to the legislation Mr. Smith proposed to request the comprehensive general development plan, which you all passed and has gotten zero response from the county, with the exception of you should thank the county executive because he's already doing it. The reality is this is not a case of filling holes. You can't fill holes unless you're digging them, which a lot of developers in this county are. If you eventually creep in and change properties alongside mine, eventually my property's character will change. They are essentially applying puzzle pieces to change the color of the pieces around it. This is not a solution looking for a problem. The problem is eminently real, and you need to deal with it. Please support the bill.
Thank you, sir. Well done. Well done. Anybody else want to come down and speak on 3217? Okay, seeing nobody else, we're going to... Mr. Wayne.
How you doing?
Same old dog with a new set of fleas, you know? Always good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
I know who you are, but the name and address, please.
My name is Ron Wayne. I'm from Glen Burnie, Maryland. And I basically cut my teeth coming down here to county council complaining about the overdevelopment in northern part of our county. I live in an area that District 2 and 3 are divided by B&A Boulevard. Within about a quarter-mile stretch, I've seen this area change dramatically. 2.5 acres was changed from R1 to 23 units, housing units. Then, right now, I'm seeing under construction, 8 acres, there's 43 housing units. Our area is congested. Our quality of life has changed because of all the congestion. It's also changed because of the the services have changed. They can't, there's more services being used in our area, fire, police, which have been discussed many other times from other people really concerned about overdevelopment of North County. So I really support this bill, and I truly hope you pass it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moyne. All right, anybody else? Going to close the public hearing on 3217. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3217.
Bill number 3217, an ordinance concerning zoning, administrative hearings, Board of Appeals, rezonings in residential districts.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith.
So last month, if you indulge me for a second here, the cluster bill failed primarily because certainly I was one of those voters who voted against it because there was a lack of knowledge and in-depth analysis given for me to feel comfortable supporting something that I had no background in. The administration, I think, received a resolution from us the previous year asking for some study to be done. Obviously, I believe some of the documents I've seen today shows me that there is the ability to assess and analyze this. I was actually going to vote no on this particular bill today. But in light of the last couple of minutes and the last hour, I should say, I think I may find a way in my head that would make me feel comfortable supporting something like this, but it's going to require a amendment. So I'm going to ask the sponsor if he'd be willing to hold off on this bill for 2 weeks as I develop this amendment that would make me feel comfortable supporting it. And that's kind of what I wanted to throw out there.
I'm game. I got a motion to hold. To get a second?
Second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll on holding Bill 3217.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Motion to hold the vote on Bill 3217 is passed.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 3417.
Bill number 3417, an ordinance concerning licenses, towing companies, police-initiated tows.
All right. Mr. Marsick? You want to come up and sit up here so I can say something? You want me to look at a chair? Okay. This bill just came in pretty much a response of getting complaints from the towing companies. It appeared that some of them, perhaps the permit or the inspection permits, were just doing things that everybody seemed to feel that wasn't exactly fair, whether it be true or not. And so one of the issues was, it was kind of a straw that broke the back, is that the administration was moving forward to invite a third party to kind of step in between the police and the towing companies at an interesting increase of costs in towing at about $24 a person. So we met and we had a pretty intense meeting, and I'm sure you know how I operate pretty much tonight, if you haven't figured it out, that meeting was intense. And so I've come to this conclusion, and I talked to my colleagues on the council and said there's something not right here, and we all joined forces and we decided to put a bill together that would kind of rein in what's going on to the towing people. So with that being said, we're going to open up the administration has anything to say first. Welcome to say it first. Mr. Marsick, you're on.
I don't have anything to add, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We're going to open up the public hearing on 3217. So all the folks that want to chime in, please feel free to come on up. We got plenty of seats up here. I got a little sign-up sheet, but it only has one person on there, so it's Mr. William Kraus. 34, oh, my bad. Okay, looks like Mr. Michael Tober? Good guess, right? Gary Thompson? Yes. Anybody else want to come down? Come on up. All right. So we'll start with Mr. William. Name and address, please, your 2 minutes, and away you go. Ms. Kraus? Got the right one? Sorry about that. I'm really losing my mind here. Mr. Michael Tuber? Sorry about that. I'll get it right eventually. Apologize. It's all done of love, okay? Not intentional.
Michael Tolbert, 833 White Avenue, Maryland. I've been in this business for my whole career. That's all I've ever done. Since I've been 16 years old, I drove a tow truck, so I got all the battle scars to prove it with new knees and my torn rotator cuffs I got to get worked on now. But anyhow, I'm asking you guys to vote yes on this bill 3417. I was here when they put a lot of this in the county code before, and it absolutely says the police department shall maintain a rotation list that includes all licensed towing companies assigned to an area, which requests for towing shall be made, and making a request for service on a rotation list. The police department shall determine which licensed tow company received the last request, and the next towing company on the list will, to respond. So the police department's supposed to do this, not a third-party operation out of California where all the money's going out there. Not to mention it's going to be a $24 charge to the citizens. It's going to be a $22 charge to the towing companies, and a lot of these cars we don't get paid for, so it would cost us $22 to go out and tow a car in for free. Now, the police department will say, well, we get to keep the car, and that is true. We get to salvage the car, but these cars usually aren't worth very much money. People don't abandon good cars. They abandon complete pieces of junk. And the police department has made all kinds of rules and regulations. When this all first started, we had a couple of pages of regulations. Now we have like 24 pages. The company that was going to come in and take over and be the third party, they had another 20-some pages of things. We got like 40-some pages of rules and regulations, and the county code's only 6 pages long.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker?
Mr. Talbert, just out of curiosity, I guess I'm a co-sponsor on this bill, and I've dealt with a number of folks on this and spoke to people. And I guess from my perspective, some of what I think the issue is from your industry, and I just want to clarify, so just a yes or no, I guess, would be necessary. If you want to expound on it, it's fine too. But my impression is that the police department, the section of the police department that handles this, has overreached.
Yes.
I think that's sort of my impression of it, and one of the reasons why I sponsored the bill with Mr. Grasso, and I just wanted you to
Yes, it's a constant overreach. Every year we get more and more and more overreach every year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sir, how are you?
Thompson, 236 Westwood Road. Currently, as we stated, the council and license and permits has set our regulations. Now they tried to bring in, to transfer this responsibility to a third party. We were told if we didn't sign the contract with a third party by April 1, we would no longer tow for the county. When all the towers decided that that was unacceptable, they moved it back that they would make us sign September for during our renewal. This contract they presented us had the third party to regulate our service level. It said the third party could coach, monitor, and discipline us. It also gave them the right to inspect our facility and our equipment. It also gave them 100% right to all our towing records, that they controlled all our records, not only that they were going to charge the county residents for every call. There's 24 pages in this contract, and not one word of it is in the county code. It just came. Then they put it, just like everything else, on us to defend ourselves against it. I hope you vote for 3417. Thank you.
Just to give you a little quick history, we had this problem once before dealing with the towing companies and being pulled out of rotation, and I sponsored a bill, and of course the council unanimously voted for it. It was 60-16, and basically what it was is to stop towing companies from being pulled out of rotation unless they were doing something to the threat, the safety, or the hazard of the people of Anne Arundel County. So what was happening was this company was bluffing you telling you that if you don't sign this thing that you were going to be taken out of rotation, and I explained to the representative from Office of Law what you were doing is illegal because the council passed 6016 that says that you cannot retaliate against somebody and pull them out of rotation unless they're doing something egregious as far as pulling somebody, towing somebody in an unsafe manner. Well, not making you sign for this contract is not an unsafe manner. And that's why it got moved from the current date to September, and they were going to make that part of the licensing of the towing. So that's what happened. Sir, you're on.
Sure. Joe Tucker. I'm from 5849 Deal Churchton Road. I'm hoping for support of the bill. I look at what we got going on here. You got 6 pages of code from the county that's pretty much your Bible that you got to go by. Then the police department comes in with 24 pages saying, hey, this is what you need to, we want you to start doing here. And then within those 24 pages, they come up with another 24 pages for the auto return. And like you were just saying, you got a guy calling me up, lying to me on the phone. Joe, are you going to sign the contract? Because if you don't, the majority of people have already signed. So here they want me to go into partners with a guy that's going to lie to me right from the beginning. It's like, I'm not all about that. I don't need the money that bad to have to lie to people. So with that being said, you've got other things that they want you to do. They want you to be driving down the road and they want to send you a text, and then they want you to reply to the text within a minute. So if you're sitting there at a light and the light's more than a minute and they send you a text, what are you supposed to do? You're in business, you're going to sit there and you're going to text. So now you're going to have problems there. Then they want you to go to the scene and they want you to photograph the scene. So I'm going to be standing around on the side of the road with a camera as cars fly by me 50 miles an hour and put my life in jeopardy. It isn't worth it. Then you got other things, tons of administrative stuff. They want you to text when you get to an assignment. They want you to text when you get to the scene. They want you to text when you're done. They want you to text when you get back to your shop. They just got so much stuff going on. It's an administrative nightmare, and I can't see why it takes 50 pages of code for somebody to call up and say, hey, there's 2 cars on the side of the road. Can you pick them up and get them out of here so traffic can go? So that's why I'm hoping for your support of the bill.
Okay. FYI, for the record, in fairness to the administration, earlier today they told me that they were going to pull this third-party company. I believe it's still that way, but I don't know. But they told me that they were going to pull it, so that should be it. But that wasn't the only reason why this piece of legislation came down. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
But was it that third party or any third party? Because are they going to just say, hey, we're not going to do all
well,
the
see, that's a good point there.
Let's get Johnny down the street there.
See, I didn't ask that one, so maybe we should investigate that one. Madam, you're on. Mr. Walker.
Mr. Tucker, didn't they also request access to your bank account as well?
Oh, yes. They wanted to have automatic withdrawals, and the county was there too, and they said, it's not a big deal to have automatic withdrawals, from your bank account when you do the towing. Well, I fixed police cars, and I told them, well, why don't you guys reciprocate? When I'm finished fixing your police cars, let me go in your account and draw the money.
How about that?
But they didn't want to do that.
How about that? Good for you.
It's crazy. So, yep.
Ma'am, you're on.
Okay.
Name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Tauber. I'm with Tauber's Towing. My address is 3256 Ryerson Circle, Halethorpe, Maryland. And I just have a few points to make. Going off what he said, if the police department is to hire a third party, it should have to be approved by the legislative branch of the county, being the county council. Under no circumstances is it appropriate for the tow companies to have to sign a contract with a third party, any proposed third party, not just the one that was recently proposed. We're licensed with the county, and that's who we work for. So if the police department wants to hire a third party, it should just be between the police department and that third party. We shouldn't be forced to sign anything. Second, if they are to hire a third-party management, the tow company should not be the ones responsible to have to pay for the fees associated with that third party. My point of view, if the police department can't afford to pay for this third party, then maybe they should find another means to an end. I don't see why the tow company should have to pay for it. And in that meeting you mentioned earlier, where the members of the police department and some of the county council were there to discuss this contract with the third party, somebody mentioned, why should, taxpayers have to pay for the dispatch of a tow company if it's not their car on the side of the road? Well, why do I have to pay for the dispatch of a fire truck to go to my neighbor's house that's on fire? It's not my house. So what I'm thinking is maybe the police department should try to allocate more budget for such a third-party management system if that's what they want to incorporate, if they think that their current system isn't working. Lastly, I think they're just trying to streamline a process, incorporating 21st century technology. You know, this isn't Uber, this is a towing company, this is towing services. You can't just text, you know, you could text me and ask me to take you from point A to point B, but you can't just text me and ask me to get your car out of a ditch. It takes skill, it takes equipment, it takes open line of communication between the dispatcher and the tow companies, so.
All right. Thank you for coming out. Mr. Wayne, name and address again, please.
My name's Ron Wayne. I'm from Glen Burnie, Maryland, and after reading this bill several times trying to understand it, I read it in a different way, and I thought maybe the bill is taking away the empowerment of police to control basically the predator towing that goes on. After being a victim of that, and I was very concerned about that, and also through monitoring the police scanners, I thought maybe the tow companies would be some of the tow companies would be getting the advantage of monopolizing all the tow industry in our county. So that was the main thing I was after. So when I first tried to understand the bill, I was against it. So and I still am against the bill. And just like in every other business, that all tow companies are not equal, and I think the police should have the power to select, pull out a rotation, or whatever the terminology they use, if they aren't doing the job that they are contracted to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne.
Thank you. Mr. Kress?
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Tucker, just a question for you. You mentioned the police manual. I think that was mentioned as well by a couple other folks who testified. Do you, I guess from my perspective, I'm not necessarily objecting to everything that's in that manual, and I was wondering if that you felt that as well. I mean, I think I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think the police are being totally unreasonable in some of the regulations that they've set up. I just feel like there are some of them that have overstepped, and I think that if we were to set this up in a process where we were to incorporate those things that the police felt were necessary into the code, it would give the towing industry the opportunity to come down and make their case as to why they agree with what the police are doing or disagree. And the police can come down in a public forum and say, this is why we think we should have these changes in the code. Do you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have stuff that comes in. A lot of it makes good sense that they come through. But to force something like this on you, this is just overreach. Just to come in and say, hey, you're going to do this. If you don't, then you're not going to be towing for us, pretty much. Right. You're going to have trucks that you're paying for. They expect so much from you, 24 hours a day service. There's so much they expect from you. And they said, well, if you don't sign, then you're not going to be towing for us. So to me, that's an overreach. If they come in and say, hey, your letterings are 2 inches and they should be 4 inches, and give you heads up, 3 months to change it, I don't have a problem with that. Just communicate. But when you're coming up with stuff like this, you ought to at least be smart enough to talk to somebody in the towing industry and say, hey, would this work? You know, and they didn't consult with any towers to see whether it worked. They just pretty much jammed it down your throat. If you don't like it, you're not going to be on the program, and they hope that it will work. And it didn't work because the towers looked at it and said, this is a bunch of crap, is all it is. It's ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
This is to anyone in the panel. If you take out the auto return contract, so, you know, all that's trash, the smartphone, the bank accounts, all that stuff's gone. And we just go back to the police manual. Is there anything in that manual that's overreaching or, you know, just kind of ridiculous or causes concerns?
Not once it's presented, it's not that bad. Last year we went to inspection, which we do every year. We arrived and they said, oh, we changed it. You need 4-inch letters on your trucks. Everybody fails. Everybody runs back and we go to get a truck relettered. Some of us just, waited on it. They changed it at the end. We had a lawyer go and, talk to them. But that kind of stuff is just out of hand. I mean, we're business people. To go get a truck inspected and then have to bring it back, you have to hire, all your people are paid. They're not making any money to go up and be inspected, and they failed us for 4-inch letters, which nobody had ever said.
So is the issue the 4-inch letters, the issue the lack of communication, the issue of the fact that you guys need that new license in September and they made the rule change August 20th? You know, the
Partly.
gentleman before you said going from 3 inches or 2 inches to 4 inches was no big deal.
It's not, except that we've been inspected. I've been doing it 35 years. I've had my trucks lettered for 35 years the same way. The state requires a 2-inch letter, basically visible from 50 feet. DOT requires visible from 50 feet. And all of a sudden, they had a 4-inch letter. Half the trucks, you can't even put a 4-inch, you know, by the time you put your phone number, you've got it running from the back of your truck to the front of the truck.
Well, the manual also said 4-inch lettering for the name and address. They were getting on people for 4-inch lettering without a DOT number and a phone number and everything else. So that wasn't even in the manual, and they were still failing them for that. But some of the things that that they did, like they used to pay us something for abandoned boats. That's a big problem now. You tow a boat in, good-sized boat, an inboard motor boat, you can't get rid of that thing. DNR isn't going to help you. They say if the boat's not in the water, it's not their problem. So you got the slumlords, whatnot, and some of these places have rented to people, and they pull these old boats out on the road and leave them there for the county police to have them towed away, and then it cost us money. We got to cut these things up to get rid of them. I mean, it's in 1987 and 88, they did a pilot program where they actually paid us $25 a piece to tow abandoned cars in. If any car we towed in that we got that salvage form on from the county, they paid us $25. It only lasted a year and a half or 2 years, and they said they didn't have the funding for it anymore. But, you know, from going, that was back when a tow job was $50. They were going to give us $25 to tow an abandoned in. Now we're going to tow something in. They used to pay for boats. They used to help us get rid of them at the landfill. Same with mobile home trailers. They cause a big problem. You can't just tow one of them in and put it in your yard. And you got something that might be 50 foot long. And it was dealt with in other ways years ago because I didn't have a problem with it. We would take the things to the landfill. We would get paid by the county a fair rate to take it there. Never had a problem. And then all of a sudden it was just rule after rule after rule, and it got to the point where I stopped towing boats in. I'm not going to tow boats in and cost me money to do it. And I surely wasn't going to pay $22 to tow one in and then spend money to get rid of the boat.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Hey, just one thing to say, when I was saying that it wasn't a big deal, you know, going up there with your truck and failing, you know, it's sort of a figure of speech, you know, like sort of don't sweat the small stuff. But it is a pain. When you go up there, you drive 45 minutes, you sit in line for a half hour, they inspect, you come back, they say, hey, you got to take these letters off. I got to drive 45 minutes back to South County, and I got to re-letter it, drive it back up, you know, and nobody's getting paid for it. So it's not a big deal in a matter of what happens during a day in business, but it is time consuming.
No, I get that, but there's no reason to believe that wouldn't happen even if this bill passed. There's no reason to believe that the police department wouldn't come down here before the council. They do it all the time for different departments like IMP. And, you know, IMP comes and gives us a building code. We don't turn that down. We always accept it.
Right.
So there's no reason to believe that those types of issues change. I mean, obviously, if this bill were to pass, you know, there probably won't be a third party. Right. And if that's the real goal, I understand that.
Right.
But some of these other concerns just seems like, you know, this bill is not going to affect that one way or the other.
Right. I didn't dissect the 24 pages that the county laid out. My biggest concern was this.
I get
it. If I looked at it, I could probably come up with things, but, you know.
Sure you can. You guys did a great job tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brewski.
I just want to ask, because certainly I've talked to a lot of people on this bill. My ears are kind of burning from it. And certainly thank everybody for their testimony. But to move forward, I guess my question is, you know, is there a towing association? Obviously, there's been a representative that reached out to me that's had that would meet with the administration to try and solve some of these things in terms of, you know, sitting down. I mean, I know Mr. Fink said getting rid of auto returns one thing, but you're 4 people. There's probably how many towers? Do you have a number? Okay, well, I know they're back, but there's more than that. But I mean, certainly you need representation to meet with the administration to try and come up with a solution that maybe fixes the regulatory manual. Because honestly, I think the real issue is here the legislative branch is trying to step in because of the issues. But on the other hand, we want to be solution-oriented. You get rid of the third-party vendor. We don't know if another third-party vendor could come forward, so that's another issue that I have. I'm going to tell you that right now. But then the second piece, though, is to let the administration also, fix these regulations from the response and talking with you. So I know earlier we discussed amongst colleagues maybe to hold this bill to allow that to happen so that we get the right fix. Because at the end of the day, we can get rid of the third-party vendor, another one comes in, but then there's other regulatory issues that come up. So I don't know if anybody wants to just comment on that and let me know. Go ahead.
We at the Towing Association meetings, we used to have a representative from traffic safety would come to those meetings, and a lot of this stuff got worked out without ever having to come to the county council or get anything done. They would tell us if they were having problems with towing companies doing certain things, whatever it may be. They might not even tell us the names. You're being late on a lot of calls. You're not cleaning up the road. You're doing this. You're doing that. If we had a problem with a police officer out on the road or a dispatcher not giving us the right information, they would go back and relay that. That all stopped when this bill went into this rotation thing 17 years ago. I invited the people from traffic safety to the meeting, and they said, we have nothing to do with your association or nothing. Here's the rules and regulations. If you don't like it, don't sign up. That was basically it. So we lost all communication about 17 years ago, where we had a really good relationship going with the police department before that. Okay. So yes, we would like to be involved or someone be involved with some of the questions and answers here. I was one of the ones that was invited down to change some of these, do some of these rules and regulations 17 years ago when it went to a rotation. It was myself and another longtime tower. And when we left there, we had 4 or 5 pages of stuff. When the book came out, it was 24 pages long. So, they put our stuff in there and then added 19 more pages. And
Gotcha.
just like picked everything apart. It was, amazing.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Anybody else want to come up and speak on 3417? Thank you. You're welcome. Seeing no movement in the crowd, we're going to close the public hearing on 3417. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 3417.
Bill 3417, an ordinance concerning licenses, towing companies, police-initiated tows.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker?
I know in a minute we're going to have a motion to hold this till the next meeting, but I just wanted to put on the record, I think from my perspective is sort of what I said earlier when I was talking, engaging the folks who were down here testifying. My perspective is that I think that there's some good that was in that manual, and I don't propose that we throw out all of the rules and regulations. I just think that we, as the legislative body, should be the ones to decide what those are and act as sort of an arbiter between the police department and the towing industry. It gives both the police department the opportunity to come in front of us and make their case as to why certain regulations or things need to be changed in the code. And that same process would allow the towing industry to come down here, just like they did tonight, and testify in front of us and argue for or against what the police department's proposing. So I'm okay. I'm going to vote to support the hold on this bill, but I hope that the police department has things that they feel like are necessary to run the program, that they bring those back to us, either in a separate bill or as amendments to the current bill in front of us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Fink?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion to hold, please?
Second.
All right. Mr. Pruski, did you want to chime in on anything, or you said your piece earlier?
No, I think I want to add, like I said, what we said earlier, that the seriousness of the bill in terms of the whole point of trying to have both groups meet. I mean, that's the whole point. We need to be solution-oriented. We got a problem. Let's make sure that the parties talk, and hopefully at the next council meeting, you don't have to deal with it. I'm going to reiterate again, the third-party piece I'm very concerned about. That maybe, I think a gentleman brought up about a software being added. Nick Napolitano could have said that earlier, his IT budget, but maybe I'll ask him that question. But, looking at some different solutions. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, Madam Secretary, we're going to call the roll on holding Bill 3417.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on Bill 3417 is passed.
Is there any other business to be brought before the county
Move to
council?
adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Get a second? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. County council is adjourned until 7 p.m. on June the 5th, 2017. Good night.